I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. Big love happens in the small moments. Hi, friends, it's JJ.
And it's her husband, Dave.
Today, we have a special guest, our friend, Ginny Owens.
Yeah, Ginny's a wonderful musician, songwriter, also a soon-to-be published author. She's got a new book coming out. So that's exciting.
So when I was in college, that's when I first heard of her music. I fell in love with it. I actually learned several of her songs for like my singing class. I would like have to sing it for my teacher and get a grade for it.
Well, and you would play her, like she's a pianist, so you would learn her piano parts too.
That's right. I was and still am a huge fan of Ginny. An important part of Ginny's story is that she's blind and she's had to navigate the world as a blind person. And the amount of resilience and humor that she has is just so incredibly inspiring to me.
She also actually has a series of videos on her social media and YouTube that's called The Way I See It, where she explains what it's like to be a blind person. And it's like, here's how you walk with someone in public if you're a blind person, or if you need to walk next to a blind person, or here's how you keep all your dollar bills straight, and little kind of life hacks that she's learned along the way. It's actually really fascinating.
It's so great. Like she has this tutorial about like how she applies her makeup. It's kind of awesome.
I could not apply my makeup with my eyes closed.
Yeah, I believe that, Dave. So in college, I actually learned one of Ginny's songs on piano and sang it during my senior recital.
I was there.
Yep, Dave was there. We were dating.
You did a good job.
You were cute.
You too.
And over the past few years, we've gotten to write a few songs with Ginny, which has been amazing.
Yeah, and right after we started writing songs with her, we ended up hearing some random week. She's like, hey, I'm moving to New York City. And we're like, what? And in this episode, you'll find out what happened.
Ooh.
That's my teaser.
Nice.
All right, let's get this thing going.
Act 3, there is hope to be found. It's no secret that if you're a musician, you depend on your instrument for your livelihood. So what exactly happens when the thing you've depended on for so long begins to become less dependable? In 2015, this is the very situation Ginny was learning how to navigate. And then things got even more complicated.
I had been on the road a ton, and I just began to notice that I was having more and more challenges with my voice. Just singing, especially higher up, but just really singing anything was becoming more difficult. And I did not know what was going on. So some friends recommended a vocal coach. She was super sweet, but she's like, wow, you have something going on. She called it some kind of dysphonia.
Yeah, muscle tension dysphonia, maybe?
Yeah, and she was like, you may never sing the same way again. You probably need to have a shot in your vocal cords, but I'll see about, getting you in somewhere. And actually, I never heard from her again. It's very strange. So the good news of that story, though, is I was recommended another vocal coach. And I was just so disappointed and scared. Because I just thought, oh my goodness, what do I do? This is my livelihood. And I can't lose my voice. And he began to teach me how to sing differently. And he was not concerned at all. He said, I think we can strengthen your voice and that these things won't be an issue. You've kind of been singing incorrectly in some ways. And it took a while, but it slowly began to help. But it was scary. It was very, very unnerving just to, even into the next year, to really have to navigate singing higher notes and just feeling like vocal exhaustion really quickly. There were a good 4 or 5 months before I was certain that my voice was actually getting better.
Wow.
I remember actually playing multiple shows where I just began to fear singing, especially anything just remotely high, having certain songs that I would dread because I knew that they would be immensely painful to sing and that I might not be able to get the notes out. one of the strange things when you start doing all kinds of new vocal warm-ups too is you got to figure out how to work with your voice again. Like it starts to do new things too. So you got to figure out how to manage those and how to make it work. And I think a lot of times people didn't even notice, but I could feel it, I just felt the pain. And I think probably my stress contributed to the tenseness of my vocal cords.
Sure.
And the fact that they weren't working, because the more that you think about it, then the more it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Was it stealing any of the joy out of those performances?
It was. Yeah, I feel like to a certain extent I was having to hide what was going on, kind of try to sing through it and not call attention to it, although sometimes I would have to apologize for, if I would have some rough notes or some really hoarse notes. I would make a joke about it with the audience.
Like, what can you do? You either make fun of yourself.
Yes, which is what I did.
Yeah. Or you
pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's really...
And I probably did some of that too. Yeah. Like I learned to smile bigger than I'd ever smiled before, I think.
Yeah.
But I will say one of the things that I learned during that season was just the value of having really, really clear and concise stories to set up the songs, and entertaining stories. I mean, as a piano, you guys know this as people that do singer-songwriter-y music, we always need to have compelling stories to go along with what we're singing about so that people are into it, so that it's all connected and they're
there's no
listening.
wow moment when like
Right.
What do you call it?
Pyrotechnics go off.
Yeah, well, I just, there are no pyrotechnics or LED wall or whatever. It's just kind of
100%.
like you and your instrument and some stories.
Well, I do tell excessive amounts of driving jokes because those do sort of
kill.
make the night great. Yes, they kill, and I always love them. I think they're super funny. So I don't know. I mean, as much as you can make people comfortable with the fact that you can't see, it's a good thing too. So
yeah. Okay, so you've got this thing where you're kind of like working through retraining your voice, which is kind of the equivalent of a normal person relearning how to walk.
Right.
It's sort of like, oh, I've been walking wrong
Right.
my entire life.
Yes. So as I'm going through that, we're on the road still a pretty decent amount, and I just begin to have this pain. And I think it's my appendix because I'm like, why? It's just strange. It's on my right side. What is going on? And I can't remember how many, but I went to the doctor, I think twice, and said something is going on, and they couldn't find anything. And I remember before going on the road for the third time, I was like, man, I'm starting to get panicked. Like, because I never really think about health things. I'm generally pretty healthy and things are fine. So I just was like, there's really something wrong. And it was one of those things that happened one morning. I was like, well, the doctors had said they're not finding anything, so no big deal. But then one morning the pain was strong, and there again, I was like, okay, something is really going on. I've got to go find out what this is. So I remember trying to frantically get an appointment before I left to go on the road. I remember sitting in the doctor's office. I think it was about 8:30 in the morning. And I was in sort of one of the little examining rooms, and he came in, he said, let's go into the conference room. And I'm like, oh my. He explained to me what I had, and he explained to me just the unknown. They did some kind of scan and found that I had a mass, a tumor. He couldn't say for sure whether it was going to be cancer or not. And yeah, I just remember just the deep, I guess, fear, knot in your stomach, the knot of the unknown, and the knot of just this completely new idea that you've never had to grapple with before. So they sent it off, and they consulted other doctors, et cetera, to try to decide what to do, gave me lots of, fun blood tests and all that. And then I remember we were going out for a run of shows in California, and when I got back, I was going to find out sort of my fate, like what the next step was, what was going on.
Wow.
And I really remember our whole last weekend of shows. I was able to tune it out until that last weekend of shows. And I remember especially the Sunday night show, just, being a little detached from my body, kind of thinking, what is this going to mean to me tomorrow? Like 24 hours from now when I'm home, will I still believe these words? Will they still resonate like they do, right now as I'm singing them with my whole heart to these people, these good folks who are listening? And so sure enough, I got home and I got a call from my doctor, and she's like, yeah, I didn't want to scare you on your trip. So we really don't know if it's cancer. So I'm going to send you to a surgeon. There was something in my blood that showed maybe it could be cancer. And so I went to see the surgeon, and he said, yeah, we should operate on Friday. This was Monday. And it was my birthday that week. So it was just I remember just all kinds of things, because if my mom had been through cancer, and I had walked through that with her and actually gone to live with her for several months and take care of her through her chemo and radiation and all that. So I was very familiar with cancer, but I think there was a certain sense of just, what does this mean? Is it going to be fatal, and quickly? And how quickly? And how do I respond? Like, how do I respond with hope? But even just how do I think about it? Just so many questions. And especially if you're a songwriter, you have even more questions probably than the average person.
How am I going to turn this into a chorus?
Yeah. Well, that, and just but existential crisis as well. Like,
Yeah, I know.
What am I doing? Am I alive? What is God doing? How does this work?
Yeah.
Does this mean I write different songs? Like, how, creative brains, bless our hearts. But I remember just praying for peace. And in the moment, I didn't feel so much peace. But what God did was he brought folks around me to give me his peace. So one of my good friends, Cindy, I think she called me maybe every day until I had the surgery to pray about it. And just to pray comfort, and also that it wasn't any serious deal. And then for my birthday that week, a couple of my college friends, we always go out for my birthday. They were okay with us going to Whole Foods, which I know is so boring for them, but I just thought Whole Foods might be healthier and, might feel better, like to be more digestible and all that. So anyway, and then one of my friends went with me to the hospital. So it was just unnerving, and yet, especially looking back, I just remember how the Lord really did bring peace to me through human agents. And the good news is I did not have cancer, so there's that. One of the things that really gripped me after I had the surgery was just how little control I truly do have, and how much before then I really thought I had. And how everything that God gives us, whether it's our vocal cords or our health or our life, is truly a gift. And, as cliche as it might sound, it's a gift not to be wasted. And I think for me then, it was a very important time of just evaluating, like, what do I want to be doing? Is it exactly this that I'm doing right now? What is it that the Lord is teaching me by kind of shaking everything that I think is sound and solid? And one of the things that I've always wanted to do is go to seminary. I always listen to seminary classes for fun because I'm a nerd. So I also love New York City. I had lived in New York for, maybe about 8 months, like in 2007, just with the backdrop of thinking about what do I want to do with my life. New York also kind of came back into the picture, and it seemed so crazy. I remember visiting New York and visiting some seminary classes. I loved them. The admissions director for seminary said, well, since you don't live here yet, I'm not sure that you would be able to start, in the fall. And I'm not sure that we can make things accessible. So I left kind of going, oh, this was fun, but probably not going to happen. And over the course of about a month, I was moving to New York.
Wow.
But yeah, it was crazy. But I moved the beginning of August in 2018, and I only began telling people at the end of June, beginning of July, because I still was so uncertain about whether it would actually happen, because it seemed like such a crazy next step. I have just loved it. I've loved the experience of being in the city. That by no means means that it's easy, but it's just one of those things you go, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing.
You have this season where you're wondering if your voice is going to be around. Then you have a season of wondering if you are going to be around, right?
Right.
And then you have an opportunity to move to New York City. You pack up very last minute, make your way to the city. A global pandemic happens. And you have to decide, what does my life look like, and what is the purpose of my life, and what am I going to contribute that's meaningful? You're releasing music, you're releasing a book. Is there a driving theme?
Yeah. How do we find hope, and how do we cultivate hope? Who brings us hope in the midst of our darkness? And I feel like darkness can be so many different things. It can be a pandemic. It can be the confusion of why we didn't get the job and what our next step is, as it was for me. It can be the darkness of a possible cancer diagnosis or an actual cancer diagnosis. But can we find hope in that? Is it actually possible that we can find hope in that? And, I've always said and believed yes, but I feel like me now versus me 20 years ago writing If You Want Me To, I know that there is hope to be found in whatever our darkness is, whether it's just that the path ahead is unclear or the path ahead seems really looming and terrible. There is hope to be found.
Oh my goodness. She is such an inspiration to me, and she's definitely one of the most positive people I know. And I feel like she's way more brave than I am. I know you love New York City, Dave, but the subway, confession, it kind of makes me scared. and there's so many people I don't know around, and I don't understand the system, what train goes which way, and I'm very directionally challenged. And so all of these things plus a dark tunnel with no breeze, I get very anxious. So to imagine Ginny in that scenario and not being able to see anything. She's my hero.
Yeah, that's really impressive. But she's talked about New York City and how much she loves it. She just says people are really willing to help. They lend you a hand. And they're actually a lot nicer than you would think.
That's so good to hear.
Way to go, NYC.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to jump back in time for Jenny's next act. And to do that, we need to step back into the mid-90s. Jurassic Park was a worldwide sensation. Nice.
Right?
Yeah,
okay.
And people became keenly aware of the fact that you should not mess around with velociraptors under any circumstances.
That's so true. I had not even heard about velociraptors before that movie.
Yeah.
It was just
Brontosaurus, which doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, Tyrannosaurus.
Triceratops.
Mm-hmm. Those were the main guys.
Yeah, the big 80s dinosaurs. But then here come the mid-90s, and Velociraptor is introduced.
It's all the rage.
and you do not want to be... I feel like the kids were eating Jell-O. Don't eat Jell-O and then end up getting... Do you remember that?
No.
They're in the kitchen and the Velociraptors are coming after them.
Are they shaking the door handle?
I mean, there had to be some of that. I feel like there were flashlights involved.
Oh, goodness.
All I remember is that they were eating Jell-O and the sound of their teeth on the spoons was really loud. That's my weird.
Wow.
Yeah. I was
It's
paying attention to audio even as a teenager watching Jurassic Park.
Amazing. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Okay. It was also The golden age of the rom-com.
Oh, I miss those so much.
I know. JJ, some of your favorite movies of all time came out in the mid-90s.
I know, like Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail. Why are these all Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movies?
I mean, they just kind of ruled that era. Well, okay. So while Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan were serendipitously meeting at the top of the Empire State Building.
They weren't in that movie, though.
What?
They weren't in Serendipity.
Serendipitously.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time.
Gosh.
Sorry, rom-com humor.
Ha ha ha. Okay. You messed up my intro. All right. Anyway, it's the mid-90s, and Ginny was about to head out to college, and some big things were on the horizon.
Act 2, If You Want Me To. As Ginny made her way to college, she assumed the hard part would be the schoolwork and the easy part would be finding a job after she graduated. But it didn't quite turn out that way. Here's Ginny.
So during my last semester of high school, I decided to go to a college that was local. I was working on taking out a student loan, and my former youth pastor told me about a school in Nashville, Tennessee called Belmont University. He had been a football recruiter for the University of Tennessee at some point. So he called and just got a lot of information from the school about, I don't know, if they had any scholarships available. And he, even though I think it was maybe March or April of my senior year, he convinced them to let me talk to them and to let me apply for a scholarship he found out about. So I interviewed with the school, applied for the scholarship. Within a week, I found out that I had the scholarship. So basically, this school in Nashville was all of a sudden the only place that I could actually afford to go to school without taking out a loan. I had kind of decided not to be a music major. I just thought, that's silly. That's what everyone would expect me to do, and I probably wouldn't be successful. So I think I spent a few weeks in psychology as a major. I think it took maybe 3 weeks, and then I was a music major. I just couldn't stay away. So and so I majored in music education and commercial vocal performance. And at the end of my junior year, I was auditioning for one of the commercial vocal ensembles, as I often did, and I never made it. And so after my audition, I was with another friend. I paid for some of my living expenses by playing piano, accompanying other friends in their lessons. And so I was playing for my friend's lesson. So my friend's standing there singing. And so our professor says, Ginny, I don't know what to tell you, except your voice is just weak. And I don't think that you will ever be able to be successful, singing for a living.
Your professor said this in front of your friend?
Yeah, isn't that cool? But she was a very blunt person. So
No joke.
Yikes.
Yeah. But honestly, it was the best gift, in a certain sense, it was the best gift she could have given me, because this was the end of my junior year. So I dropped my performance major. So this meant I actually got out in 4 years. The next semester, I had to take something like 23 hours of general ed courses, just because I had been taking all those music courses for so long. So it was like, 9 hours of science and math and all these great things. But I remember that during that next semester, I wrote lots of my first album. So it ended up being not necessarily such a bad thing that she said that. And then the title track from my first album, Without Condition, was one that I wrote during class. I remember beginning it in Western Civ class one morning and then plunking the rest out in the practice room later. So that was one that definitely ended up kind of surprising me. And I thought, this song's never going to go anywhere. And then it ends up being the title track of the record. So I graduated really excited about all that was ahead. I had some job interviews lined up with, different school administrators around the city. And I felt like I'd learned a lot during my student teaching semester, and I'd, passed my national teacher's exam. So I had a legal teaching license, which was pretty cool. And so I kind of thought the world was my oyster and that, things would happen. And that was not the case. I mean, it took me, I think, a couple interviews to realize what was going on, but I would go in and meet with principals and they would just be startled. They did not expect that a blind person would show up, and they certainly didn't believe a blind person could do this work of teaching or managing a classroom at least. So I would get really bizarre excuses like, well, you're not a member of the Piano Players Guild or just strange things. And so I kept, being a good Christian girl growing up. I thought, well, God's just teaching me patience and he has something right around the corner. And, about 5 or 8 interviews in, I was way over that idea. I was just like, God, what are you doing? So, 3 or 4 months later, I'm still interviewing. I had started then just looking for any job and was finding it very difficult to get any job. I worked with some folks who help people that have various disabilities get placed in employment. And one of the ladies told me, she said, I always find that blind people are the hardest people to help get placed because people can't imagine how you would do anything without being able to see.
Part of me wonders if the general perception from the public, I imagine, is there's this sort of level of pity and lack of expectation that like a blind person could perform. There's that. There's also apparently, I just learned these statistics recently and looked them up and was just sort of mortified at this, that apparently many people's, like a top fear of many, many people in the world is that they would become blind. Like that is a legitimate top fear of people. There's like public speaking, death, blindness. It's like...
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I mean, up there right above cancer is blindness. And so with that in mind, you don't want to be around somebody whose life situation you totally fear, you know? Of course, I didn't know that at the time. And so I just took it personally and whatever you do when you're 22 and you think everyone should just want to be my friend. Well, so I did find a job. A wonderful guy, he and his wife ran a consulting firm, and they consulted with nonprofits and then fundraised for them. So I was one of the fundraisers. So you would call and set up all these meetings for nonprofits with these big companies so that they could go ask them for money. It was a terrible job for an introvert, just terrible. But I loved the people I worked with so much. And I remember it was during that season that the Lord really began to explain to me, you do not get to know what's ahead. And that doesn't mean you can't trust me. You know, I am with you, and that is what I have called you here to teach you. And what you get to do every day of your life is embrace that more and more wholeheartedly than you did the day before. That was pretty life-changing for me. During that season is when I wrote If You Want Me To, as I began to realize it truly was not about just sort of waiting through the trial and just knowing that God would make it all better. It was about learning to trust Him. And that even if life was incredibly difficult, He would work beauty and good out of that. And He would deepen my character through that. So,
I got a question about that. Like, at some point, you had to sit down and write those lyrics.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, like, was there any kind of aha moment or some catalyst?
I mean, I don't remember exactly where I was when it happened. I remember it had some silly lyrics in it. It had some lyrics like, how did it say? Something about walking through winds of change, but only feel a breeze, or something. It had some pretty amazingly bad lyrics. But I remember just pretty naturally coming to the idea of, you know, I will walk through the valley if you want me to. And just pretty quickly that becoming the theme of the song. And then what happened is during that same season, I had been invited to sing at church, which I never sang at church, but it was Belmont fundraising day at Brentwood Baptist. And I don't know, but I got to wonder if they asked the blind girl to sing because they thought,
Sympathy points for the
bless
win.
her heart. And it totally might not be that. You just never know. But it was so sweet. They asked me to sing for the offertory. And so I sang something I had written. And there was a guy in the congregation who was an audio engineer and had worked with Point of Grace and some different bands. And he said, have you ever thought of doing music for a living? And I was like, well, I used to kind of have that dream in college. And I mean, this may have actually been during I think this was during my last semester of student teaching. So I was out of classes at that point. And I just said, I don't know. I don't really know. And he said, well, I don't know either, but we should try recording some piano vocals of your songs and I'll share them with some friends. So I recorded a few, and I'd hear from him once every couple months, and he'd be like, nothing yet.
What's this guy's name?
Doug Sarrett is his name.
Okay. So Doug hears your music. Does he have a studio in his house or something?
Yeah. Yep. So I go over to Doug's house, and we record, I think, 3 songs in his studio, 3 or 4 songs in his studio. And he just passes those around to friends in the business, I guess music publishers, A&R folks. I'm not actually even sure who all he gives them to. But finally, maybe 4 or 5 months later, he calls, which feels like an eternity to me. Now I look back and I'm like, this happened so fast. But he says, there's a publisher that wants to meet with you and really likes, what you're writing. And I remember thinking, oh man, should I just forewarn this guy that I can't see so he doesn't totally freak out like all these people I'm interviewing with? But he didn't freak out. I didn't call him ahead of time to warn him. I just showed up, and he was wonderful. And he said, working together in this industry is kind of like getting married. So you have to date for a while and make sure it makes sense to get married. So I'm going to put you with a lot of my writers, and I'm going to write with you, and we're going to see how it goes. He was just so wise. A guy named Michael Purrier, and I wrote with him for maybe 8 years.
Wow.
So what happened is I brought him the rough outline of If You Want Me To, and he was so good at just knowing what a song needed. I feel like that might be a lost art today, but he always knew exactly what was missing from a song, and he paired me up with Kyle Matthews, who was one of his writers at the time and had become a friend of mine. And we wrote If You Want Me To over time together, like over maybe 2 or 3 sessions. Kyle's a great lyricist, and so he, kind of helped me craft all that I wanted to say. And it was a special song. I don't think I realized, it's funny because even now as I sing it, it, always means something different every night that I sing it, or every time, just because we all know what it is to surrender and to do it uncertainly. But I don't think I realized all that it meant at that time. It's so strange. I barely remember much about how those sessions went. I remember sitting at the piano, and I remember him walking around, like pacing around as we were writing, as you do in songwriting sessions. And, you got to move and just hacking it out on the piano. I just remember and still love just the line about, but you never said it would be easy. You only said I'd never go alone. That line. And then also just the verse about, when I cross over Jordan, I'm going to sing, I'm going to shout.
Gonna look into your eyes and see you never let me down. So take me on the pathway that leads me home to you. And I will walk through the valley if you want me to.
It applies to a new situation every time you sing it, just whatever's going on in your life at that time. But then also, it's still the struggle to surrender is just always real. It's always with us. You never get past that struggle. It's always like the struggle of the human will to trust that God, who you can't physically see, still knows what he's doing. So yeah, I think just that same desire to surrender more eagerly, I think that is kind of the same every time. The next person that Michael introduced me to was a producer that had just moved back from LA named Monroe Jones. And so we ended up making a demo. Michael began to take that demo around to different labels, and several were interested. We did lots of showcases, which were super nerve-wracking. So a showcase is when you show up at a label and you play music for them. They have a big conference room. They set it up with chairs, so it's more like a small theater, and they sit around and stare at you, I guess, and you play music for them.
And then they decide if you're good enough to be a part of their label. Did I win music?
Did I win? Do I get to go on to the next round? Yeah. At this time, I had gotten a slightly better job. I was working at Vanderbilt University as an admin assistant to a professor. So still not teaching music, but loved these folks, and I wasn't having to call businesses to ask for money anymore, which is super great.
Yes.
But I remember one day I went to work and I had not washed my hair, and I was just like, oh, it's okay. They won't care. And just like one of those, I don't know, get up and get ready in a hurry. And Michael calls me and he's like, hey, could you go meet with the folks over at Rocketown this evening? And Rocketown's the label owned by Michael W. Smith and no longer exists. But at the time he owned that label, he had recently started it. Maybe it was about 2 years old, I think, at this point. He didn't tell me what I was going to do. He just said, go out there and talk to them. So we go in and he's like, hey, will you play a few songs? And so then the president of the label, Don Donahue, came in and he was super nice and he sat down. And then Michael W. Smith walks in and I was like, oh my God, it's Michael W. Smith and I did not wash my hair this morning. What the heck? So, and I think for Michael, If You Want Me To, and for Don, If You Want Me To, was the song that connected them. And so I ended up on the label with Christy Knuckles, Christy and Nathan, which was Watermark, and all kinds of great, amazing folks. And I remember just, once we made the album, it was just kind of like being in the fast lane. Like my first performance, or one of my first performances, was at the Hard Rock Live in Orlando, where we cut A Night in Rocketown. And this was after my record was recorded, but before it was released. And so we made a live album, and Michael W. Smith was hosting the night. And it was the first time that I actually told this story of If You Want Me To a room full of folks. And it was the first time that I'd gotten to play live with a band and play live with my friends on Rocketown. I remember that just being an incredible time of realizing, wow, music has the power to connect us, and it has the power to speak in ways that just simply speaking words cannot. And I think also just as a person who had been often separated from people because of their fear of me as different, it was so much fun and so special to find, wow, I belong now. And nobody's thinking about whether I can see or not. They're listening to the songs. So that was a profound moment of change for me, and just a beautiful night of being embraced for the gift that I was bringing instead of whether I could or couldn't see.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I think back to all of those people in all of those rooms where you interviewed for jobs, like all those people who really missed out because you reminded them of something that they were afraid of. Mm-hmm. And so then to contrast it with that moment when you're on stage singing these songs of joy and peace and filling that room with hope and bringing people together, like that's just so beautiful.
It's funny. I think about that sometimes. You said that more beautifully than I've ever thought it, though. But but what I think about so often is how God was like, Ginny, you totally did not need to be in the classroom, because you would have had just so much fun, like hanging out with the students and playing music that you may not have managed a classroom well. This is what I actually called you to. It was a much better idea to just share your music. And I've gotten to teach since. I've actually taught at Belmont, and one of my friends actually let me come and teach a 6-week course at her school in New York City to her middle schoolers, which was super fun. And I was like, yeah, I'm good.
I personally am really glad that things worked out the way that they did, because it means that we can all get to appreciate Ginny's artistry now.
Well, before we hear about Ginny's first act, we've got to set the scene. And that means our time machine needs to be set for the late 70s.
All right.
It was an era of a brand new craze taking the world by storm. JJ, what was the craze taking the late 70s by storm?
Trolls?
Troll dolls.
Yeah.
I think that's earlier, actually.
Okay. Birkenstocks.
I think that's earlier too, but I'll tell you what it was. You ready? Drum roll, please. I was expecting you to tap instead of use your... Okay. Rolled R, please. It was Space Invaders. Space Invaders were invented in the late 70s.
What? Like the video game?
Yeah. It was like it was a craze.
Space craze.
No, I mean, like, the country of Japan was like overwhelmed with demand for Space Invaders.
How did people play it? Was it on?
It was like the arcade game.
Okay.
Like they would set them up, like, and then
in
just,
their house, or they would go to the arcade?
No, in like the mall and stuff.
Okay.
And people thought that video games like Space Invaders was going to be like the new horse racing or something like that. It was like new technology that people could potentially bet on, but in time it just turned into something that like
Kids do waiting for the dentist.
Well, actually, here's the thing is that modern video gaming industry now is like 3 times bigger than the music industry and Hollywood combined. It's like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Wow, that I contribute $0 to.
Yes, you are not the target audience for whatever the number of generations is that came after Space Invaders.
Video games.
But think about it. If it wasn't for Space Invaders, Mario and Luigi would never exist.
That is so true.
And they bring me and our children so much joy.
Yes, I can recognize that.
But you also kind of pass on the whole like video game thing.
Yeah, I go into the other room and do something else.
Well, as that craze descended upon us all, see what I did there?
Oh, Space Invaders?
Yeah, they kind of like come down.
Okay, yeah.
Above.
Well
Yeah,
done.
Thanks. Ginny was growing up in Jackson, Mississippi. Let's hear about it, JJ.
Act 1, Arms of Love. Ginny's early years taught her to be resilient, but she also needed an outlet to express her emotion, and she found it in music. This act includes Amy Grant, a lunchbox, and an orphanage full of friends.
I was born with hereditary eye conditions multiple ones that I inherited from my dad's side of the family. So I had minimal sight to begin with, but I had like cataracts and glaucoma and all kinds of things that limited my vision. I could see, though. I could see people, and I was learning my colors. I loved purple. And apparently, I don't totally remember that, but that's what I've been told. And when I was 3, I had a cryotherapy treatment, which is kind of a freezing treatment that the doctor thought would restore some of my vision, or at least sort of stabilize it. And that did not happen. Instead, it just took all the vision that I had.
Wow.
So, but my mom, my mom and dad knew that was a possibility. And, so they just sort of took it in stride and taught me how to. And my mom said, I kind of just chilled out for about 6 weeks after the surgery. And then I was out, playing again, and like nothing had ever happened. So I had the blessing of just kind of learning that I could do anything that I put my mind to, except maybe not drive a car very well. That doesn't work too well.
So I'm assuming, just from what you said, there was no great mourning of the loss of your sight when that happened as a young kid.
There wasn't, although I do remember for a couple of years, there would be moments where I would like go look under the couch for my eyes kind of thing. I just couldn't figure out where they were and why they didn't work. I don't have a memory really of being able to see. Sometimes I can see in dreams very occasionally, but then even when I wake up, I don't remember what I saw. I just know that I could see. But yeah, so I mean, there must have been a bit of mourning just because of trying to find my eyes, but or trying to make them work. But yeah, that was pretty short-lived, I think.
When do you remember discovering music?
About the same time, actually, probably earlier. As soon as I could talk, I was singing. Everyone loved music in our family. So my parents tell a story of me standing up at age 3 in front of the choir during practice, like on a pew, and telling them they were not singing the Hallelujah chorus correctly and trying to teach them how they should sing it, which is horrifying. I would not do that now, nor would I have when I grew up, even as, became a
Introverted adolescent?
yeah, exactly. Introverted adolescent, yes. So we had an old piano that lived in the corner of our dining room. It was a reject piano from the church, had a few keys that didn't work, and it was pretty out of tune. And my parents brought it home, and I started figuring out you could pound out your favorite songs by ear. And it totally was just so much fun. So yeah, about the time I was losing my sight, I was finding music and loving it. And yeah, it really became especially as I got older, as I got into elementary and middle school, it really just became my place of peace and where I would go to express my heart, and kind of was my way of journaling, was to sit at the piano and play and write songs.
Wow.
Do you have a particular song that like really struck a chord with you?
The two things that I remember first moving me were Annie, the musical, and the movie. I loved all the songs from Annie, and just the lyrics really moved me. And I decided I wanted to become a redheaded orphan, and it was going to be great. I was going to have all these friends at the orphanage, and so
Dream life.
yeah, dream life. And then it's over in 2 hours, right?
It's a hard knock dream life.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. But then one of my mom's friends gave me tapes, love it, cassette tapes, of old Amy Grant albums. And I remember just being so moved by her vulnerable, quiet, gentle voice. And the songs were usually really simply produced, acoustic guitar and a few other things, or piano. And there was a song called Arms of Love, I remember, that was so just poignant to me as an 8 and 9-year-old. My parents were separated. We were going through that. I was learning what it meant to be different in the world. And, that song had a beautiful chorus that said, "I've found a place where I can hide. It's safe inside your arms of love. Like a child who's held throughout a storm, you keep me warm in your arms of love." So, and I'm sure, JJ, I bet you did this too, but I would just sing songs, like get the karaoke tracks and sing for hours in my bedroom those songs. And that was one of my, or I would just sing over if I didn't have the track, I would sing over the top of the...
Oh, yeah. Duet with Amy.
Come on.
Duet with Amy. Yes, exactly. And it was kind of like the verse was all about the sadness of the hard time in front of her, but then the chorus was of joy, hiding in his arms of love. And I remember just not being able to articulate all of that, obviously, but just being so moved by that.
Yeah. I'm sure you've interacted with Amy Grant over the years.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the first time I met her, I about freaked out. I just about died. She's the only person that I met in Nashville that I just about lost my mind. I just didn't even know what to say. And when I first met her, she had just been in that movie where she played a blind girl.
Really?
Yeah. And it was like a made-for-TV movie. And I was like, oh my gosh, I loved how you played that blind girl. I play a blind girl in real life.
We have so much in common.
Yes. It was just amazing. But she's always super sweet to me. And so now when we hang out, I'm like, I can't believe I know Amy Grant. It's so crazy.
Have you told her that story, though?
I did tell her a little bit of it. And she was very sweet about it. But, she hears stories like that all the time.
Sure.
So
I think it is really interesting to, like, be in the artist's shoes and have someone who had such a deeply personal, resonating kind of experience with your music when you weren't there to be there with them.
Right. Right.
But somehow, like, the work that you created gave them hope.
Yeah. One of the things that has been helpful to me over the years when people say that is to think about my experiences, because it feels so foreign to hear that. And when I first started touring, I just was always like, gosh, I am not worthy. This is awkward. And then finally, I felt sort of the subtle voice of God being like, you know what, this is not about you, and you keep making it about you. This is about how I am just growing and speaking to people, and I just happen to be, using you. You happen to get to show up to the party, but it has nothing to do with you. So I feel like as people have told me stories of when my music has encouraged them, I think back on how artists have encouraged me over the years, and it, I don't know, puts it in perspective. So one of the things that was really great growing up was just that my parents said, hey, you can go and do whatever you want. You can climb trees. The neighbors were always terrified because I was riding my bike up and down the street and climbing trees. But my mom always knew that I would be careful and that she didn't have to worry about me. It was my brother she had to worry about. But when I went to school, it began to dawn on me that there actually was something different about me, and that kids knew that too. Other kids knew that as well. And I remember particularly in middle school, as most of us did in middle school, I remember having just a really hard time and kids just being horribly mean. I remember one day, the ringleader of the popular girls, during lunch, she stole my lunchbox, and she kept just hiding it away like I was eating, and she just grabbed it from in front of me, and everyone was laughing, and she just kept taking things out of it and eating them. And then she'd put it back in front of me and stop for a while until I went to start eating again, and then she would just grab it and everybody would laugh. But things like that happened regularly, and kids would, call me stupid and, talk about me as if I couldn't hear them. And I remember one time, just after an incredibly terrible day of that, my mom just saying to me, Ginny, you know that Jesus is always your best friend, but there are definitely going to be days when it feels like he's your only friend. But you can trust him because he is there. And what I also learned just as time went on was, he's been through the worst darkness that I can't even imagine. So when I talk to Jesus, I'm not talking to somebody that's just out there somewhere. I'm talking to God who is man, God who has been through deep pain and understands. And so, when she first said that I could trust him, even when it felt like he was my only friend, I heard it, and I don't think I wanted to think about that. I wanted friends.
Orphan friends.
Yes, I wanted orphan friends.
An orphanage full of friends, Mom.
Yes.
All that I want. Is that too much to ask?
Yes, come on, God, please. But I think just over time that really did take root. And, whether it's the loneliness that comes, when you can't see and everyone else can, and, people sort of maybe forget and leave you out of something or just are scared of you, or whether it's the loneliness that kind of comes for any of us who are creative and know that others don't quite see the world the way we do, or even the loneliness of being single, or, we all have certain places where we can be very lonely or have felt loneliness. And I think realizing that Christ is there even amidst those quiet, lonely moments was hugely life-changing for me, and just began to take hold over time. And it's, something that I've written about constantly. It's something that I, talk about a lot. It's something that I want to make sure that others are encouraged by and hear. So yeah, that was my mom's encouragement that has sort of reverberated throughout the years of my life.
If your parents had not brought that piano into your childhood home and you hadn't begun to learn to play piano by ear, do you feel like you would have the life that you do now?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe because I also loved to sing so much, and my parents took me to a Yamaha music school class when I was 4. And I remember, maybe 3 or 4, I don't exactly remember, but I do remember being the only kid in the class that could sit at the keyboard and play whatever the teacher was singing. And it wasn't hard. And all the parents were like, "That's so great." And I was like, "It's really easy." So I might have figured it out anyway, just because I was a music magnet, I certainly wouldn't have found the solace that I did growing up, just having that piano there so that when everyone else was out of the dining room, I could just sit and play and contemplate life, and that God's joy can be our strength, and that He wants that to be the case as we go through anything that we might be experiencing.
And that is why Ginny Owens is so incredible.
Yeah, she's pretty cool. Ginny's new book, Singing in the Dark, is going to be releasing May 1st.
That's so soon.
And you guys can pre-order it when you go to your favorite book retailer and just search for Singing in the Dark.
Do it. Before we wrap up this part of the show, it's time for a segment we call...
Let's rewind the tape! Ginny is a singer-songwriter and author currently living in New York City.
But she wouldn't have moved to New York if she hadn't reevaluated her life after losing her voice and suffering a health scare.
Which interrupted her career as a musician.
A career that wouldn't exist if she hadn't come to Nashville to develop her musical giftings in college.
Musical talents that she fostered at the piano that sat in her dining room because it was donated by her church.
Amazing.
You can find out more about Ginny at ginnyowens.com. That's GINNYOWENS.com.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller.
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
That I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2 letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.